Thank you so much for having me. Let me share my screen. Oh, geez. Oh, I'm so sorry. We just did this.
No worries.
Okay. Here it is. You'd think I would be used to this by now. Okay, this should work. Does that look good? Hi, I'm Anna Kaplan. I am Executive Director of Graycliff in Derby, New York, and I'm excited to show you all about the property today. I actually am relatively new to the organization. I came on in early December, so this has been quite the career change. It's been it's been interesting to say the least, but I'm really thrilled to be here. It's the silver lining for me personally has been that I've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time on the property and have it to myself and really understand the magic of the place and understand what the Martins, how they were able to, really live here during the summer months and enjoy the landscape. I am embracing this format of a virtual tour, and I'm really excited about it because it's really the opportunity to not only show you the property as it is now, but to take you back in time a little bit. So I'm going to intersperse my presentation today with some historic images from when Darwin and Isabel Martin lived here, and also some images from the second owners of the property as well. The Graycliff Conservancy was founded in 1997, and we are the third owners of this wonderful property. So I know that you had the benefit of hearing from a representative from the Darwin D. Martin house. So you already have some background here on this man on the left, who is Darwin D. Martin. He and Frank Lloyd Wright, who is pictured as a younger man, we don't normally see him pictured that way. They had a really interesting relationship, and the reason why Frank Lloyd Wright came to Buffalo, and I'm sure that this came up in the past presentation, was through a Chicago connection. So Darwin's brother, William E. Martin, commissioned Frank Lloyd Wright to build this home in 1903. And William E. Martin was the president of the Martin Stove Polish Company in Chicago. So this home is in Oak Park. I believe it's privately owned today. And when Darwin Martin, William's brother, was looking to build his own home, his brother convinced him that, you should call up Frank Lloyd Wright. And so not only did he do that, but he was able to get Wright the commission for the Larkin Soap Company administrative building. Darwin Martin was a top executive at this company, and Frank Lloyd Wright designed this incredible administrative building that was at one point existed in downtown Buffalo. I believe it was designed, I think the date is 1903 to 1905, and it was it must have been an incredible building. It was demolished in 1950, unfortunately. At the same point that this was being built, Darwin Martin and his wife Isabel Martin, their residential home on Jewett Parkway in the Parkside neighborhood of Buffalo, was also being built. also designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. And this is the home that you were given a glimpse into recently through this programming. So this is in downtown Buffalo, designed in 1905. 20 years later, when Darwin Martin retired from the Larkin Soap Company, he wrote to Wright again about designing a summer home on Lake Erie as a gift to his wife, Isabel. And that brings us to Graycliff. So Graycliff was designed in 1926. It's in Derby, New York, as I mentioned, right on Lake Erie. And it's about 20 miles south of Buffalo. Darwin and Isabel were used to summering at the Lake Placid Club in the Adirondacks, and they were looking to invest in a property that was closer, where Isabel especially could spend her summers, and it would be her place of escape. So they purchased 8.5 acres from a man named Dexter Rumsey. Can you see my cursor? Okay. Dexter Rumsey owned all of this property, and he also built a summer home right over here. It still exists today, but there's this development that has cropped up as well. This was on a street where, all the wealthy people of Buffalo at the time, they all had their summer houses here. So the Martins would have known many of their neighbors already. And they were friendly with the Rumseys. They purchased this 8.5 properties, 2.5 acres, this area we refer to as the home grounds. And then there's 6 other acres that go from this historic stone wall that is hard to see right here out to the road. And on those 6 acres, there were wildflower fields and an orchard and a pine grove that was meant to reference their time in the Adirondacks, and a vegetable garden. So all these other natural assets that added to the property, and they were designed by a woman named Ellen Biddle Shipman, and I'll talk about her a little bit more and how she fits into the conception of the property as we move on. But this is it, right here on the lake. And not only are we on the lake, we're on a 60-foot cliff. So this is the cliff right here. And this was an ideal site for Wright to execute his ideas of organic architecture. And I know I don't need to explain how wonderful Lake Erie is to this group, because being on a Great Lake yourselves, but it really is an incredible spot. The views are amazing, the sunsets are amazing. So the site itself is really wonderful, and the lake is very important conceptually to Wright's plan. So 1926 to 27, the house was designed and construction began. The first summer that the Martins spent on the property was 1928. And between 1928 and 1931, there are a few tweaks that were made because Isabel had some requests. When Darwin wrote to Wright, he made it certain that Isabel was to be the client of record. This was Isabel's house. She was the one who was to steer the decisions. And Darwin Martin and Wright had this really special relationship. You might know from other presentations about Wright is that he was often very uncompromising in his vision. Martin was a true patron of Wright's for these decades in between the Larkin Soap Company, administrative building, and Greycliff. And a really huge supporter. Not only that, they became good friends. So I think that Wright was more willing to make some concessions in terms of his design and change some things. And as you'll see as I move on, he even moved walls, all for Isabel. So it makes the site and the history of the site in light of Wright's career an interesting one. And something else from this picture that you can see is that there's not much going on here. That's because the land had been prepared as farmland. So it really was quite barren. It was a blank slate when Wright got to it. So this is the family. Darwin Martin, his wife Isabel. They had 2 children, Darwin and Dorothy. These are Dorothy's 2 children, Margaret and Derry. They were both born in 1930. They'll come up again in my presentation. They're both still living. Derry turns 90 just next month. And they also grew up here, summering here. But as I mentioned, Isabel's the client of record. I love this picture. It's Isabel as a younger woman in the Martin house. And then here she is at Graycliff. Darwin Martin passed in 1935, so he didn't have many summers spent at the property. Isabel would continue to summer there through 1943, and she passed in 1945. It may have come up in the Martin House presentation that Isabel had an eye condition, scleritis, and that made her vision blurry. I was told that it was often hard for her to navigate some of the darker spaces of the Martin House. So one of the concepts that was imperative to Graycliff was just letting light into the house. You'll see that. After having seen the Martin House, you'll recognize that this is a very different approach. 20 years later in Wright's career, it's also supposed to be a modest summer home. I mean, in my terms, it's not modest, but that's something that they keep going back to. There isn't the art glass of the Martin House, for example. It's also not furnished with Frank Lloyd Wright designed furniture. There are many elements that he designed, but once we get inside, you'll see that we have it set up with furniture that they would have lived with, which was a lot of wicker, and Isabel made it certain that she did not want to live in a vision of Frank Lloyd Wright. She wanted to live there, and often people come here and they feel that this is a very livable space. They can picture themselves living there. So every tour of Graycliff starts here at these piers. These are the original piers that would have designated the driveway. This is a newer driveway. They shared a driveway with their neighbors, the Rumseys, and in this historic picture, you can see this poplar line driveway was the original approach. So you can no longer enter the way the Martins would have, but we can imagine it, and we've kept and preserved these piers in order to talk about this approach, because the approach is important, right? It's how Wright has thought of everything, and the way that the site is framed by the natural surroundings is incredibly important. I want you to note that these piers are made of rock. This is Tichenor limestone, and it's taken directly from the cliff. So it was hauled up from the beach. Also, sand from the beach was used in the mortar. And you'll see this Tichenor limestone throughout the property and the structures. And a couple things about this limestone is that it's really full of fossils. And when you're on the site, the more time you spend on the site, you start to notice the fossils. That's something that Wright was very aware of. He also was inspired by this kind of rusting color that you see. That's iron oxide that's leaching out of the rock. And that really went well with his autumnal color palette that you'll notice. And then he also took note of the way that this limestone fractures when it falls off the cliff. It fractures in these diamond shapes, and that diamond comes up again and again in his design for the property. So now we're with the stones, kind of in front of us, but you can see the original approach. And something really important here is that the way that this orients you is not with the focus on the structures themselves, but instead the focus is on the lake. because the lake is of the utmost importance, and everything ties back to the lake and the natural surroundings. And, you know, one of Wright's major goals is to have this seamlessness between his built structures and their natural environment. This is the main Isabel R. Martin house. We call it the Isabel R. Martin house. And that's what you saw under construction in that historic image. A couple of things here. The cantilevering of this balcony, you can't really see it over here, but it continues. There's more cantilevering over here. You know, that's one of Wright's signature architectural strategies. This was a project that originally had a budget of $37,500. And we happen to have all of this correspondence between the Martins and Wright. And it gives us a glimpse into, it's really a wonderful trove of information, right? To learn about what went into building the house and the decisions. So often we find the Wrights asking, we find the Martins asking Wright to make decisions or make changes that they hope will save some money. So one of these changes, they wrote, and they did not want this element, which is called a porte cochere, and they did not feel that this cantilevered balcony, which is off of Darwin's quarters up here. Darwin had his own quarters so that he could come and go as he pleased and not disturb Isabel, because he was often still working in the city. He was really known to be a workaholic, even though he had retired by this point. So they wrote and they asked that these two elements please be removed in order to save some money. Wright wrote back and he said, "You may not need these, but the house certainly does." And I would tend to agree with him. So as I mentioned, $37,500. The project ended up costing somewhere around $250,000, you know, in 1928. And I think that figure is before the changes were made between 1928 and 1931. So this was to say the least, this was an extremely expensive project and happening at a challenging time because Darwin Martin lost a fortune in the stock market crash. You'll notice the red of the roof, that ties into this rusting color. And it was really important to the aesthetics of the design. Oh no. Yikes. I'm sorry. I got out of here somehow. Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm so sorry. I'm just gonna stop this for a minute and get back in here.
No worries.
Yikes. Yeah, I mean, you'd think that everything would go smoothly and I would be used to this because I've been doing a ton of these. And
It's okay.
Okay, let me try this again. So sorry. And I thought the trouble was going to be that my daughter's piano lesson was going to be this. That seems to not be a problem. Okay, we're back here. Okay, now I've got to get back to the Zoom. Okay, hopefully we're back on. Okay, I just wanted to mention the Sunken Gardens. So Sunken Gardens are one of the key points here of the design. There's one here. This picture happens to show it without any flowers, but it would have been full of dahlias or zinnias. And over here is another sunken garden, and we'll take a closer look at that in a couple slides. But you'll notice that the cantilevering here of the balcony paired with this sunken garden is actually a conceptual reference to the way the Titchener limestone cantilevers over the cliff and, you know, the sunken nature of Lake Erie. Here's an historic photo of that sunken garden, that larger one, just to orient you. Here's the porte cochere. And so it is full of zinnias or dahlias. I'm learning a lot about plants, but before this, I had minimal knowledge, just to defend myself. And this is Dorothy with Margaret, I believe. And this is a sun porch area, which I did not include in my presentation today, but Wright did say that he wanted the experience of being in that room to be as if you were in a field of flowers. So he's trying to break down that barrier between interior and exterior. So I have this slide in here so I can talk about the pond. We have restored the property to the way it was in 1931. But the month, I believe the month is April 1931. That's important because in September 1931, this pond was no longer here. This was something that Isabel never liked. She was afraid that the children would fall in and you know hurt themselves. So she had it filled in 1931. When the Conservancy made the decision to restore the property to a specific day and time, you know, moment in time, the decision was made that this pond is integral to Wright's vision, even though the Martins only lived with it for a short amount of time. It's important because it adds this conceptual link to the lake beyond. And when you're standing out on the driveway and you first get a glimpse of the house, and we don't see it here in these pictures, but it's one of the wonderful things is that you can see right through these windows, these living room windows, to the lake. And it's been called a sort of screen on the landscape. And so this water feature just gives this effect as if water's almost flowing through the house. And at one point, Wright even suggested that there be a water feature on the back esplanade, which I'll talk about when we get there. And Isabel wasn't interested in that, but that would have added this even stronger conceptual connection to the lake. We have this wonderful hand-colored, hand-drawn map of the property. This is in Wright's hand, you know, which is very special. I have yet to see it in person. I believe it's at the Cornell. It's in the archives at Cornell. And it's a little, our image of it is a little blurry, but I wanted to show you that this, you know, show it to you because you can see that this was clearly the pond. And over here is where he envisioned there being a water feature at one point, and then he altered his plan and instead had planned on a colored planting, so like blue flowers, and that could be the conceptual reference to the lake. So the landscape was a part of Wright's vision, and I should mention this is the tennis court over here. But his concept of the landscape specifically isn't something that really fit Isabel's vision. So Ellen Biddle Shipman was hired in 1930, 1931, around there. She was this incredible pioneer in her field as a female landscape design architect. And she really had made a name for herself in the early 30s. She was called the Dean of Women Landscape Architecture in 1930. She was given that prestigious title. And so the Martins hired her to rethink the landscape. She was hired mainly to provide shade, wind protection, and color in the planting. So our restored garden today is a mixture of both Wright's vision for the landscape and Shipman's. Shipman was all about native plants. So there's a lot of native plants, and trying to plant a garden that would be relatively low maintenance. So this is her plan for the property, right? And I love it because, I don't know if you can tell, but it says, take this out. And so that's that pond that I was just showing you. And so this is what it would have looked like without the pond. There continued to be water in this one element over here. We still have these planters. We often get asked the question if they were contemporary to the property. And as you can see from this historic photo, they were. And there was also a lot of heavy planting, again, to provide shade. This is the property today with Wright's pond restored. And just this past season, actually, there's still a couple pieces that are finishing up, but this was supposed to be the season that we were unveiling our restored landscapes. Last season was the first time we were opening up the house and unveiling that not only the restored interiors, but also the furnished interiors. And this was to be the season where we added the restored landscape, at least the 2.5 acres onto that. Oh, and here's just an image of what it takes to maintain this part of the property. Okay, so that brings us back to the front of the house and this other wonderful sunken garden here that's full of 4 o'clocks. And this space, we call it the South Terrace, really does confuse the interior space and the exterior space. So when you're standing out here, you look across and you're unsure of, whether you can access that. When you're inside and you step outside onto the terrace, it's unclear whether you're still inside or you're outside. So it's this wonderful example of how Wright likes to confuse the inside and the outside. And he does that because of the way that the garden is sunken. He does that by this shared use of materials. You see the Tichenor limestone on the exterior of the house. It continues on the inside. Same with the stucco. The stucco is a slightly different color on the inside, but it's a shared use of material, and flagstone also for the floor. Here you also can get a good glimpse of the lights, which are square fixtures, turned on the axis so that they become diamonds. And this diamond shape is something that he plays with and repeats. He did not design the fixtures, but he selected them all. 4 o'clocks are planted here. They actually self-seed every year, and we just have to straighten them out a little bit. They're wonderful flowers, and they're very fragrant. They're called 4 o'clocks because they normally open between 4 and 8, although it really has nothing to do with the time and everything to do with the temperature. So when it's a little colder, they open and they're wonderfully fragrant all night long. So you can imagine Isabel sitting out on her terrace, enjoying the fragrance of these flowers. So I love this moment to be able to show you this picture, because often when I'm talking about this to a group of people who are physically on site, it's hard to envision exactly what I mean. Graycliff sat vacant for several years between 1943, which is the last summer that Isabel spent there, and 1950, when a group of Pierrist fathers purchased the property. They purchased the property to use it as a school. This group of fathers dedicates themselves not only to their normal vows, but also to this additional vow of serving underprivileged youth. So this became a hub for Hungarian culture. They happen to be Hungarian, and they housed many students here. So one of the first things that they needed when they came to the property was this proper space for their chapel, and they didn't have that. The fathers ended up making many additions to the property, including the building several other buildings. But this is the first thing they did. They enclosed that space that I just showed you in order to make their chapel. And this is what the inside looked like. They closed in the sunken garden. They moved that row of doors to be the exterior wall. They added a roof. They put colored glass in here and so that it would feel like a chapel space. They also knocked a door out of the wall. And this is one of the first major restoration efforts that happened in 1997 when the Graycliff Conservancy took over. And I don't mean to show you this. I want to show you this because it's an important part of our history. Also, this group of fathers were really important to Graycliff. They cared for this place. They lived here. They were the longest tenants. They lived here for almost 50 years, and they knew the importance of the place. And when they were ready to move on, they ensured that it was put into the Graycliff Conservancy's hands, which it was a newly formed group of just concerned citizens, basically. We grew from a very grassroots place. And they could have sold it to a developer and made a lot more money. Instead, they made sure to pass it along to a group of individuals that were going to restore it. And so this is the space here. Oh, and this is a wonderful historic photo of Derry out on that same, this picture of Derry is exactly what I just showed you. That was the priest's or the father's chapel. So pretty amazing, the restoration effort. So today there is one edifice that still exists that the fathers are responsible for, and that's the building that we use as our visitor center. That was used by the fathers as a gym. So we kept it and we retrofitted it to be our current visitor center. So I like to explain that because often when people come to the property, the visitor center seems very out of place next to the Frank Lloyd Wright designed architecture. But once you know this about it and know how important the fathers were to the history of the property, it makes a lot more sense. Okay, so we've gone in the front door of the Isabel R. Martin house, and I didn't have a picture that showed the entire view, but this is basically it. These are two pictures, but you come in and you're in the porte cochere. So Frank Lloyd Wright is using this strategy he often uses called compression and release. So we are in this smaller, darker space, and we're still there when we step in. And then that space opens up either over here to your right. You can walk down this little hallway and be in the main living room, or you can go upstairs. The stairs are really wonderful. They also conceptually reference water. It's as if water is kind of flowing down. And the way that the railing is designed, it clearly communicates that this is the private space up here. You are not welcome up here. Down here is the public space for guests. And here you can also see there's a lot of cantilevering. So this is the Fern Room. Over here is the main living room, which we'll see in a minute, just to orient you. The Fern Room is very special. Here, you can see this Titchener limestone again. In this big space, Frank Lloyd Wright uses different ceiling heights in order to demarcate the different areas, the different rooms, instead of walls. And that's pretty usual of Wright designed architecture. Over here in this corner, he had the idea that he wanted the windows to meet in a seamless way to kind of break the cube of the room and have the panes of glass meet. In order to save money, the design ended up like this because this incorporates standard window hardware of the time. But this was an idea that he had in 1926 when he designed Graycliff. It was about 10 years later when he designed Falling Water that he was able to fully execute that idea. And it's at Falling Water where you have the panes of glass meeting seamlessly. So something really wonderful about that corner of the room is that on the summer solstice, once a year, that corner frames the setting sun really perfectly. And I took this picture actually this summer solstice. And you'll notice that there's a sunken planter space in here. So the same idea of the sunken gardens outside, but this time it's on the inside. So again, he's confusing interior and exterior space. Also, the floor in this room is made of slate that was recovered from the city of Buffalo. They were redoing their sidewalks at the time, and Darwin Martin had a connection and was able to source that material from the city of Buffalo. And when you're here in person, you can see that there are surveyor's marks in the stone, which is kind of interesting. So now you can see that, you know, this is where we were, and we're standing now in the main living room. I mentioned before that this home is not full of Frank Lloyd Wright designed furniture like the Martin house is, but there are several pieces designed by Wright, including several tables. This bookcase is Wright designed. It's not an original piece. We had it restored based on the information that we knew about that particular object. And we just had our back to this space, and we've turned around, and this is the main living room. Really a gorgeous space. A couple of things about this room. Wright really ingeniously designed the doors to, they're placed offset of each other from this side and that side, so that air really circulates through here. Also, these windows and doors on this side are slightly higher than on the south side, and that kind of maximizes the light coming in. Also, you'll see that we have this enormous, amazing fireplace. This was a summer home, so I'm not sure how much they used it, but as is typical of Wright designed architecture, the hearth is the focal point and the heart of this room. And this is really an incredible fireplace. These are historic photos, so you can compare these with the way it looks today and see where our inspiration is coming from. So again, this is how Isabel wanted the rooms furnished. I should mention that the fireplace was designed so that the logs fit in it vertically. And this also gives you a good sense of that fireplace. Again, it's made of Tichenor limestone, as we've seen before. Oh, and these are my two youngest in front of the fireplace, just a little picture for attention. And it's also a good reason for me, an excuse for me to mention again, Derry and Margaret. So I love to mention Derry and Margaret because they were, you know, children on the property. I think oftentimes people don't think of Frank Lloyd Wright designed properties as homes for children, and this was their home. They loved it. They lived in what we call the foster house, and we'll get there in a minute, but there are 3 structures designed by Wright on the property. The Isabel R. Martin house, which we are now in, and then what we call the foster house. And it's called the foster house because Derry and Margaret Foster and their parents, Dorothy and James Foster. So Dorothy Martin, Isabel and Darwin's daughter, married a man named James Foster. And so this is their nuclear family. And they were out here every summer also, along with Isabel. Here is a great look at some of the fossils and a more close-up look of that iron oxide that seeps out of the Tichenor limestone. And that fireplace is a double fireplace. So on the other side of it, you have the dining room area. And you'll notice that this corner looks different than the corner in the view room with the ferns. And it's important to note that Wright originally designed this so that it was symmetrical. He wanted that corner to look just like the corner on the other side of the house. But after that first summer in 1928, Isabel was displeased at the placement of her dining room table. She didn't have the view she wanted of the lake. So she wrote to him, and in 1929, that wall was moved. And you can see that in the floor, there is still the evidence of where that wall was. Beyond the dining room is this pantry area. And what's really special here is that there is this sink, this gorgeous sink, German tin, and it is devoted exclusively to floral arranging. Isabel was extremely fond of flowers. She was known all through Buffalo for her floral arranging skills. And this was a space that did not have anything to do with food prep and everything to do with her flowers. Which brings me to this lovely area where I'm virtually standing right now, which is our picking garden. This is the stone wall that I mentioned very early on when we were looking at that drone photo. And so from the stone wall this way is the 2.5 acres that's the home grounds. And from this stone wall this way to the road is that 6 acres. And this is this lovely picking garden that was restored recently. I believe it was planted in 2017 with help from volunteers from M&T Bank. And it was designed by a horticulturist that we have on staff based on what she knew of Ellen Biddle Shipman's plans. And it's full of native plants. And it has been a real pleasure for me to get to know this. And I wanted to give a picture of what it looks like in June and what it looks like in October, because it really changes weekly. And it's still looking beautiful in October. And I think it will for several weeks. But it's wonderful. And it existed explicitly for floral arranging and for, Isabel to enjoy. And what we have restored is only half of what probably existed because the visitor center is in the way of the other half of the garden. Oh, and here's an historic photo in the picking garden. And what's really interesting here is that they would have had this overhead irrigation system. It really is like a irrigation system for a small farm. And this is, it just shows you that the care that they took in the landscape and how much it meant to them. Oh, here's some more pictures. And through this door, is that pantry area and the floral arranging sink. And then this is the kitchen. So as you can see, there is, this is the original sink for food prep. And out here is access to that south terrace again. This is very close to the stove that they would have had, although I believe that their stove was 1 burner larger. And let's go upstairs. So at the top of those stairs, and again, these are the stairs right when you walk in the front door, there is this iconic diamond shaped window. And again, this is Wright using that shape of the diamond that came from the Tichenor limestone. And it really does fracture into these diamond shapes. And it all feeds into this idea of organic architecture, trying to make that seamless connection between architecture and the surrounding environment. This is the upstairs hallway. It is one of my favorite spots in the whole house. It's light filled, it's gorgeous. The wood here and throughout a lot of the house is red Tidewater cypress. There are no knots in it. It's this lovely warm color. And it also is used for the molding up here. And the way that I have this, and you can see the molding on this side too. It's not decorative. It's not just decorative. This is also a picture rail. So it was this functional thing that allowed for the Martins to hang things on their walls without disrupting the stucco, which is rather fragile. And then over here, this would have been used for curtains. And Wright did design these radiator covers. I wanted to show you this because we've come a long way with our restoration effort, which, started decades ago. And the interiors just were finished in 2018. The The fathers, they, as I mentioned, they really cared for the property, but they also lived in it and they used it, which actually arguably helped to preserve it. Someone who is heating the property regularly, living there, then helps to mitigate issues if there's a plumbing issue, or just just having it heated regularly helps with preservation goals. But they also painted the walls and nailed things onto the walls. We did find original stucco in the closets, and we took that chemical analysis and used it to make a recipe for the stucco that you see on the walls now. This is Isabel's bedroom, and it is one of 2 bedrooms that has access to this really wonderful balcony that overlooks the lake. There are 6 bedrooms total on the 2nd floor. We are just going into Isabel's. Connected to Isabel's bedroom is this bathroom, and this is another example of how Isabel steered some of the design decisions. This space right here was originally conceived of as a closet space, with the now closet designed to be the bathroom. During construction, when Isabel realized that this would mean she wouldn't have a view of the lake from her bathroom, she insisted that they be swapped, and a hole was actually, cut out of the rock here in order to accommodate that window. Here's a view from that balcony. And actually, here's a picture that I just recently took. You can get a sense of how big it is and the view of the water. But that's a yoga class in action. So I've been trying to use our natural assets for programming like that these days. Okay, so now we're back outside. You can see this is the view room. And this is the balcony we were just on. This is the Esplanade. So originally, Wright conceived of this space as a water feature, as I mentioned. And that would have given you this view from the living room that connected this water to the lake. I think of it as like an infinity pool. And I don't in any way mean to imply that anyone ever would be swimming in it, but just that conceptual nature of making the view appear as if this body of water is connected to the larger body of water. This shows what Ellen Biddle Shipman planned for this area. Junipers, which we have restored. There's some original, but we had planted some more. And it's a very different concept than Wright's colored planting. We have lost 11 feet of cliff due to erosion. So today there is only a remnant of this stone bench because of that erosion. And we've obviously lost all of this walkway. There actually isn't even a beach. We still have the stair tower, although the latest phase of restoration that we're in will dismantle it. But there really is no beach to go down to anymore. But I show you this so that you can conceive of how it used to be, and also as a reminder that this is a summer home, this is a beach home. They often access the water. It was really important to their experience there. This stone bench is going to be restored in the next phase of restoration. And originally, Wright wanted for the steps down to the beach to be carved into the side of the cliff. Thankfully, that no one went through that effort because that would have been gone a long time ago. It's been said that Darwin Martin had this erected on the wrong side, according to Isabel. And it should have been over here. And Isabel was not interested in seeing anyone walk across here in order to get down to the beach. So Wright's, while she was sitting out here on the terrace. So Wright's solution to that was dropping this walkway down a little bit and installing the stone bench. So this would allow people, whether that be her grandchildren or her staff walk over here, and they would be obscured by the stone bench. Here's another view of the stair tower. We actually did receive funding to restore this and to restore the bridge. The decision was made that that was not the best use of public funds because it would have been a very expensive project, and we wouldn't be sure of the longevity because the erosion continues to be a concern. Also, we would have incurred liability, and that would have added to our operational costs, and no one would be able to use it. So instead, we are dismantling what is left of the stair tower, and we are not going to be restoring the bridge, but we are restoring the stone bench, but it will be set. It'll have to be seated slightly different on the property, and it will change the dimensions a bit. Here's some historic photos of that stair tower and access to the beach. Derry and Margaret on the beach. And speaking of Derry and Margaret, this is the Foster house I mentioned. This is where they lived. It was originally designed to be an apartment for the chauffeur. Oh, and I'm sorry. And then this is the third structure is a heat hut. And basically that was just a structure to house the boiler because Frank Lloyd Wright was very concerned about fire. And he had just had the second fire at Taliesin West when right before he designed this property. So he was acutely aware of fire protection. And these are the Fosters: Dorothy, James, Margaret, and Derry. And Derry, who turns 90 next month, just came to visit us. He has vivid memories of the property. He recently suffered from a stroke and he has trouble verbalizing, but from what he can communicate, and you can just sense his emotions, he has a very strong connection to the place and vivid memories. So both he and his sister Margaret are alive and well, and we are in communication. So it's really wonderful to have that direct connection to the Martin family. And this is the interior of the place where they would have spent a lot of their time. This is the main living space. And the cantilevering on the Martin house, the Foster house, is much more dramatic than on the main house. And this is one of the cantilevered balconies with a cantilevered overhang. After her first summer on the property, another change that Isabel requested was for the garage doors to be moved. This is the porte cochere, and this is where the garage doors originally were in this historic photo. And that meant that when she was sitting on her south terrace, where those lovely 4 o'clocks are, enjoying her lemonade, that she could hear and see the tinkering of the cars right here. This is something she wanted to avoid. So the doors were moved around here to this other side, which is where they are today. I wanted to make sure to show you this picture of the tennis court because this is one of the most recent restorations that we've done. And I don't actually have a picture of the final restoration, although you can see this is the original court. Wright definitely called for it in the plans. He also had something to do with the color, and it's colored concrete, which is a precursor to the series of homes that he designed in concrete and colored concrete. So it's really important in that regard, and we're almost done restoring it, and we're excited to start playing on it again. And then, as I mentioned, this is the last phase of restoration. I feel like the property is going to be in a constant status of restoration, but this is what's next, and it's scheduled to happen in the spring, this work to the Esplanade. And we are open. We've been open since August 1st. Because of New York State mandates, we can only give private tours to, or guided tours to members of the same household or party, but we also have a self-guided tour program. And I'd love for you to come out and visit us. And in a couple of weeks, we have a virtual fundraising event happening as well. I just wanted to mention that. And I can now take any of your questions, and thank you so much for listening.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Anna. What a beautiful, beautiful space. So we do have some questions. First being, how many houses did Wright design in the upstate New York area?
That's a great question. Darwin Martin was one of 3 Larkin executives who had homes designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. So there's also the Walter V. Davidson house, which is on Tillinghast in Buffalo, and then the Heath house, and those are both privately owned. So there's 2 other residential structures that still exist. And then there's a Fontana Boathouse, which he designed and was never erected during his lifetime, but so that's a interpretive, building that exists in Buffalo. And then there's also the Pierce Arrow Car Museum, and inside that there's another interpretive structure, which is a filling station designed by Wright, I believe in 1927, so pretty contemporary to Graycliff. A gas station that was designed to be in Buffalo but was never erected.
Did the priests leave the house to the Conservancy, or did you purchase it from them? How did that work?
It was purchased, and in order to make the purchase happen, the Baird Foundation, they helped to secure the loan, and they were the underwriters of the loan. And this group of concerned individuals, they came together, they were able to raise money. The fathers worked with the Conservancy to, allow for this to happen. They did things like allowed for tours while they still lived there, and it wasn't, closing hadn't happened. So they were extremely accommodating, but it was purchased by the Conservancy. And the figure is not coming to my mind readily.
I'm sure it was a lot.
I want to say it was around $400,000. That's what's coming to mind, but don't quote me on that. I know we're recording this, so I'm sure someone will correct me.
There was a really big discrepancy between the 36,000 or 37,500 that was originally allotted and the 250,000 at the end. I mean,
yes. I know, and this. I think that Darwin Martin, he must have been prepared for this, because something very similar happened with the Martin house. I think he had a similar budget, and I'm pretty sure that house ended up costing, I want to say, 150,000. So it was, he had already been burned once before. And I think that when Darwin Martin died, he died with Frank Lloyd Wright owing him, like $75,000, something like that.
interesting.
Oh, and a story I forgot to tell you is that, Frank Lloyd Wright visited the property right before he died in 1959, or just a few months before he died. I don't remember if it was 1958 or 59, but and he saw the father's chapel. And he said to have gotten out of the car, looked at it and said, "That is not my work." And they explained their need for a chapel. And he basically said, "Well, if you had to do what you had to do," but he was very displeased.
We had a question about the flower gardens.
Mm-hmm.
The gardens at Graycliff are very similar to those at the Martin House in Buffalo. Was it the same person who did the flowers?
No, not the same person. Ellen Biddle Shipman was our designer, and the designers of the Martin House, their names are Walter and Mary, and I can't remember their last name, but there are some conceptual similarities to the approach. And obviously Isabel is also the link, and she was steering a lot of this.
What's the significance of the name Graycliff?
It has to do with the gray shale of the rock.
Well, And again, that was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. The house is beautiful, just like all the other Frank Lloyd Wright houses that we visited. So we're out of time, but I really do appreciate you sharing this beautiful property with us. We're really appreciative. To everyone who's joined us today, thank you so much. We are thrilled that you were with us. Please visit our website, jccchicago.org, for more programs coming up soon. Thank you again, Anna. Everyone, take care and be well.
Thanks for having me. Take care.